who started working on NAREE conferences in 1995. And Mr. Duany, who actually came to the Southeast Builders Conference to debate with Urbanism back in 1993. The fact that they have such historical knowledge of their subjects and yet are absolutely cutting edge today, it's just my pleasure to welcome you both. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. We have the honor and privilege of having, as you know, Andreas Duany, not just prestigious in terms of what he's done to the landscape with hundreds and hundreds of new urbanist communities, but it's the quality of the communities. And even perhaps more notable, the son and grandson of developers of kind of more like the ULI type of developer. But I'd like to introduce him with a personal anecdote. The other night I was telling my husband, who is a student of this area, I said, oh, you know, I'm going to get to do this fireside chat with Andreas Duany. You know, he is the founder of New Urbanism. He said, what? He said, that was like really more of a collective type of thing. And I said, and so I turned to the arbiter of all marital relations. Alexa, who was the founder of New Urbanism? According to Wikipedia, Andreas Duany. So with that, we're going to start off talking a little bit about, you know, what's probably on everyone's minds. While Mr. Duany has a legacy of new urbanists, now we're really looking at the environment in terms of, you know, what's happening as, you know, we're dealing, you know, with the ongoing pandemic. Tell us, you know, kind of how you've evolved with that.
Well, first of all, it is a collective. It was actually, regardless of what Alexa thinks, and that's its power. There are many, many people involved that were right there from the beginning, and we gathered into an organization called C&U, which is an organization that actually doesn't particularly grow because it always presents very complex issues, and people want simple solutions. So I actually forget your question now, but I just want to give a complex answer, so ask me.
Okay, well, I will tell you, Siri, I told another friend of mine about this, and Siri did go to the collective.
Yes.
With Cal Thorpe and Liz and everyone.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to tell our audience here today, you know, what we should be looking for and where does new urbanism go in a post-pandemic world?
There are two kinds of developers. There are those that actually, their profit is based on selling things quickly. And then there are those whose profit is based on actually increasing value. You know, it's either a production play or an appreciation play. The pandemic thing is an appreciation play. It's something that actually will become more and more important to people as the damn thing just doesn't go away. Now, I know that because developers have to be optimistic, they have from the very beginning said, experts have told them that this is going to go away, and shops are going to come back, downtowns are going to come back, etc. And as usual, it's all the extent to which they're going to come back. But the post-pandemic architecture is, the reason it intrigues me is that it's not all about a disaster, it's about making a much better world. And I can describe one of the things, probably the single thing that is really good news, is that the cities and the units have to get better in ways the developers have not been thinking about. And this came when I began studying. I was actually retained by a developer to study post-pandemic architecture and urbanism. And I began with the 1918 influenza. And in those days, we weren't confused about vaccines, whether vaccines worked or not, which by the way, we're still completely confused. If you read this morning's paper, does the new Omicron respond to vaccines or not? We're still confused. What's not confusing is that light, is that sunlight and air is good for you. Okay, that everybody knows that. That's non-negotiable. So in 1918, because when they weren't confused with vaccines, two things happened. One is the move south to the warm climates of the United States occurred then. If you think of Miami, we say, well, this all happened after the invention of air conditioning. That's not so. It began happening in 1921. Coral Gables and the other 20 John Nolan towns were 1920s. LA in 1920 was a dump. 1928 was one of the most glamorous cities on earth. So was Miami. This was because they had to come to the light and air. And if you look at the ads, there was always a health component. In fact, some of the houses that were presented were called literally health houses. And one of the transformations that happened was modern architecture. The second thing that happened is that modern architecture came in on a health platform. Porches were eliminated to be replaced by terraces and pools. Pitch roofs were eliminated to be replaced by roof gardens. The big glass let sunlight in. The white architecture, you could wipe it down. The furniture was no longer stuffed, with fabric. It was metal, so you could wipe it down. On and on. Modern architecture came in by saying this is healthy. We must have cross ventilation. People started going to the beaches seriously. Clothing got shorter and less formal. It was a huge transformation. So the 1918 pandemic, sure, it was followed by a short, what the Cubans call Dance of the Millions, but it was really what was the 20s, the Roaring 20s. That didn't last. Okay, that was very short, it was very high-end and very urban. Okay, well, we're going to be followed by the Roaring 20s. Sure, if you were rich, young, and urban, that works very well. For the rest of the people, it was not working. So I think the transformation of the post-pandemic architecture and urbanism is actually all to the good. First thing that we discovered is that public space is wonderful, that actually eating and dining outdoors is a delight. Okay, that's amazingly how we had forgotten. And we're now recovering huge swaths of streets for humans. That's a permanent condition. It's happening very quickly everywhere. The second thing is we have to get serious about balconies. Right now balconies are these thin strips, just look around, thin strips that just simply house sliding glass doors. But in fact, the balcony is a very serious, like a loggia, double height, big. You could do your yoga outside, you could have guests outdoors. And that totally transforms the look of architecture. And then the last thing is garages. Garages should be designed as lofts to be convertible to workplaces.
This comes, just to underscore what he's saying, this comes from someone who really for decades advocated front porches, and the socialization that you get on front porches. So,
and garages to the back.
And garages to the back. But in addition, now the materials that you can use for garages, it's not, the doors that you get at Lowe's anymore.
Yes, no.
It's like the modern mullions, it's the glass, it's just a lot sexier.
It's used for restaurants now, beautiful aluminum doors.
Right, and I feel like with your design for that, there's also spaces for where you can get away, like if you did have to quarantine or not. And may I note here that if you would be so kind as to just raise your right hand, on his wrist you'll see all 3 colored bands, which is kind of significant of the design of these houses, where there's places in there to stay away, the red, places in there to interact on a smaller scale, and then, places where, where you get the hug. And I feel like that they
what happened to the hug me? Just so negative. I'm ready to be hugged.
But
I don't know what color that is.
It's true, though, that the design of these houses, they bring in a little bit of each of those colors.
Yes. I think we have to take the bedrooms much more seriously as separate units, as opposed to just this is where the bed fits, and then we have 3 or 4 public rooms in the house. You can reallocate that to actually serious bedrooms, like little lofts, that have a lot of storage. Anyway, it's on and on like that. And some of them are just simply that they have to be outdoor spaces to meet, but don't underestimate cross ventilation. Okay, we have. I always assumed as an architect that I was a good guy and I took care of everything. That I would automatically have cross ventilation. I would automatically have light and air in every room. Guess what? I didn't. I had forgotten. I had been so distracted by all sorts of other things that the IBS proposes, like in-wall espresso machines and stuff like that, that I actually forgot the fundamentals. And absolutely, the COVID has reminded us what makes the great cities great, including working at home. The live work unit was the standard issue housing throughout history in every culture. Of course you worked at home. Of course, even the palaces of Italy, the great palazzi in Rome, they were mixed use. The warehouses on top, et cetera, et cetera. It's only with zoning in the 1920s that we separated that. By the way, one last radical thing we have to think about. The ADUs, which add mixed use because it isn't just about use, it's about age. Very few people are going to put the ADU in the backyard, the additional dwelling unit, because you can't get it over the side setback, and most people don't have large enough backyards. They should be in the 25-foot front setback. The 25-foot setback is a total waste. You can put it in the front of the setback. It urbanizes, it brings the urbanism to a higher level in which you have tighter streets, and it completely upgrades the look of your house, which is probably out of date anyway. Just when you put a building in front. So I think the great new territory for additions is the front setback, this stupid 25-foot American front setback.
The other thing that I think is interesting about these designs is that the brain of these houses, so much of it has been centered on the kitchen, but in these designs, the brain of the house, believe it or not, is really in the garage. Yes.
What I see in my 2 years walking around Coral Gables and seeing what my neighbors have done, Liz and I ruined our house by working in it. We ruined our living room, we ruined our dining room. The people who had nice garages, they just turned them into lofts. And it's wonderful. They opened the lofts in the good weather, and they're out there in the garage, participating in society, and looking really good. I have some beautiful slides of converted garages. I think the most exciting part of the house now is the garage. The hell with the third or fourth or fifth. Enough of the bathroom and the plant. If you go to the IBS, half the thing is bathrooms. Okay, I think there should be a huge agenda about what a garage, what the potential of the garage would be. And by the way, it isn't just ornamental, it's what's the right height, what's the right width, whether you separate them or not. The garage has a great potential in the post-COVID house.
Also in the New World Order, that I think really flips what a lot of us, our preconceptions of new urbanism. It comes in on wheels. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, personal anecdote. The young people in my office heard of a big conference of tiny houses in St. Augustine, and I said, oh yeah, the hell with that. But then I heard they said that 60,000 people were showing up. Okay, now 60,000 is a serious number compared to this operation here, or New Urbanism, 2,000 attendance. 60,000 is very impressive. Now, I don't know whether 60,000 showed up because it was a huge field. It was almost like a farm where it was happening. But there were enough porta potties that made it with 60,000. You couldn't count people, you could count porta potties, and then divide by liters of pee, and then you more or less get it. And it was maybe 15,000, but still, that wasn't the impressive part. The impressive part was the enthusiasm. Okay? What happened was the atmosphere was like Woodstock. It was the excitement of the young people, like nothing that I've ever been to has been as exciting as that conference. And I said, I better pay attention to see what was happening. Now the thing about tiny houses that I saw is that the models they had were either by very high-end architects that were expensive, or by stone hippies, and they didn't know how to design any of shingles on the bathroom and so forth, But there was nothing normal in the middle, and that requires very close reading of the code. Once I started reading the codes very closely, you realize that the thing about houses on wheels, and by the way, most architects, they say, well, can you do that but without wheels? Sorry, all the brakes you get are keeping the wheels. The wheels is what allows dimensional changes. It allows you to do certain things that really fit a lot of space in a small house. Now, as far as business is concerned, if you read closely the code, not only does it meet the International Building Code, it also meets the Department of Motor Vehicles. So you can get a license plate on it. Once you get a license plate, you can use any parking lot. And by the way, there are millions of underutilized parking spaces. You always say the cars are on the way out, the electrical cars are going to do it. The great play in real estate is the underutilized parking lots. Okay, that is where it's all at. And all you have to do to find them is to look up Sears, or one of the dead stores.
Or the office parks.
Office parks. The office parks too. Now, what happens is that the kids are commuting very long distances, like Silicon Valley is the classic. They commute an hour, hour and a half, and they still only get a ranch house. It's not a cool life. But instead of housing their cars, or accommodating their cars, why not accommodate a vehicle that actually fits in the parking lot and is licensed by the Department of Motor Vehicles? It's incredible because it brings...
Google is actually doing this, with its workforce, and it's a cool thing if you get to be in one of their...
I would have normally showed you the picture of that, because you have to design it to fit the parking lots. But here's the incredible thing about it. They will never sell you a parking lot because they want to flip that piece of real estate. No one that owns them wants to give up on the real estate. But they will lease you a parking lot, which is what wheels allow. You say, I need a 5-year lease. Now, is 5 years enough? That is the exact depreciation schedule of equipment. So instead of depreciating a building at 30 years, which is what we do with office buildings, because it's equipment, because it's licensed by the Department of Motor Vehicles, you can depreciate it in 5 years. It's a free subsidy that's unbelievable. You don't even have to apply for it. It's just a piece of equipment like a Xerox machine. So it's a whole new business plan, completely from beginning to end, that it opens up development that is truly affordable for young people, because we're not doing a damn thing for the Generation Z. Nothing. Okay, they're hapless. There's nothing for them. And they love this also because the gig economy allows them to move. Instead of subletting apartments, sublet to sublet to sublet, as I get the next gig here or there, you just pick up the damn thing and you take it to Buffalo. That's the next hot place. You see, with all your equipment and everything. It's really the most interesting, incomparably, the most immediate thing that can be done for Generation Z.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. On abandoned parking lots, it could be...
well, without tearing them up.
Right.
Because no one will let you tear them up. And by the way, a parking lot is already... it has a footing. Half the cost of a house on wheels is the damn footing. Right? You've got to get into the mud. Yes, you produce this beautiful thing in the factory, but you're still out there in the mud digging. All this stuff. The parking lot can actually bear it. It's green. It has electrical. It has all the utilities, and they're grateful to actually have it. It's pre-permitted because you've already ruined nature. There are no environmentalists to stop you.
It's just the most marvelous. Yeah. In terms of, just to build on the idea of affordability, in terms of, as you have pointed out, our #1 crisis, do you feel like it's a product more of the building codes not shifting, more a product of the need for a big profit margin, more for just big land costs? Like, what is going on?
Okay, the #1 thing, you can actually trace it everywhere, is the regulations, the impediments to getting permits. That's why it's so hard in California. And I can tell you stories in California that you won't actually believe unless you're from California, because it's like 27 years to get a permit, things like that, for something that's perfectly allowed. These stories are incredible to anybody else, but wherever there's a high regulatory environment that is that is becoming normal. Housing becomes very unaffordable because you can only amortize the long process by selling high-end housing. You know, you can't just make a $10,000 profit. It's going to take you 3 years to get a permit. You have to sell higher. And also, if you're constrained, you have to sell higher too. So that's the main thing that happens. Now, there's another thing called the labor shortage. If you leave the high-end areas, for example, if you go to any place that has a military base, and there are many in the United States, there's a fantastic labor force there at the military base, in Fort Benning, etc. It's just that they do not need housing. So the thing about the wheels is that you can build in a low labor cost area and take it to a high value area. The great thing, the great business is not building in a low labor cost area and then selling it in a low value area. The whole thing is to shift that waterfall of value, okay, from where it's cheap to build to where they pay you a lot. Now, for example, speaking of Fort Benning, you reach both coasts easily within 200 miles. You do Fort Benning, which is full of highly trained people who show up on time and don't do drugs every day, okay, because they're veterans. You can reach both the Atlantic and the Florida coast, which are all high value and are now in crisis of high labor costs. Just put it right there. And then there are other places in the United States that you can strategically have. Imagine housing in which you don't have to decide, shall I do it in Houston, shall I do it in Charlotte? No, you have a ratio, an easy ratio of 400 miles. 400 miles, by the way, is what you don't have to pay for a hotel, for the driver. You can, of course, do longer. But it's an amazing, it's a totally new kind of real estate. Totally new, and you can depreciate it. And by the way, you have a title, which means that the investor doesn't need to even become your partner. You just give them the title and say, okay, give me this and I'll give you this much money. You can't really buy them if you're a Generation Z. You always rent them. But actually for the investor, it's a very smooth deal because you actually own the product, and if you don't get along, you can move it out.
You know, as you bring up the magic word coast, and we do just have a few minutes left, we would be amiss if we did not address what was going on Florida's coast now and how that intersects with design.
Yesterday there was, okay, what's happening here, if you really study closely when the problems emerge, the physical problems are really quite far off. That's why I say affordable housing for young people is immediate and climate change and flooding is late. Yes, we flood, it lasts a few days. It's very quickly forgotten. The press loves the hysteria. You know, they get down on their knees and they photograph the public, you know. But basically, we've been living with this a very long time. What happens, what's killing us is the insurance. Okay, and because insurance is being withdrawn, it's becoming very, very expensive. And without insurance, you have no mortgages. So the collapse is actually much closer than we think. It's not the flooding. Look at this. I mean, does this feel like a city on the wane? No. But it's bought by people who pay cash. These buildings are actually pre-sold, you know, for cash. They're secure investments. That's why it keeps happening. So they're going to be in the future. There's a map. There's always a map that says, this is the fire zone, this is the drought, this is the heat wave, this is the flood. You know, there are 4 or 5 terrible things. We're not at famine yet, okay? And we're not at social chaos yet. Those 2 are to come. Okay, social chaos and famine, that comes later. It's generally happening in other countries and creates immigrants. We're not doing that. We're just doing fire, flood, windstorm, and heat wave. Okay, that's what's getting us. Once you always see these maps. Okay, this is the area of fire, this is the area of flood. If you overlap the maps of those 4 apocalyptic events, you have to look at the America that's left. There are places that actually are not going to be troubled. Now, there's earthquake and tornadoes, okay, got it. But basically, there's a swath of America, very large and very wide, that goes from your direction, there are the lakes, you know, the Great Lakes, and then it turns down somehow for some reason, down the Ozarks to Texas. It's a 7. It's actually an inverted L. Those are the areas that will be receiving areas. There are sending areas and receiving areas. Okay? People will be leaving areas like this, and they will be looking for places that not only are intrinsically safe, but need to be prepared to receive them. And preparation requires an assumption of a greater degree of collapse. Okay, like for example, electricity might be, just like in the rest of the world, not always available. Security, we have experience in secure cities now, undependably secure cities. We have experienced dysfunctional government. So what happens in these areas, which are intrinsically safe, you overlay for the next crises that are coming up. This is the longer range real estate play. You overlay, you prepare them to bridge the crises. And the last thing I want to say about these crises is they can't be solved forever. Think of the medieval cities that have gates and walls. If you read the history, they closed those gates every 10 or 20 years. It wasn't constant, it wasn't every night. Okay, what we wanted to do was deflect marauders. We wanted to survive the hard times. You can create places that will survive small-term, short-term crises. You cannot make a place that will survive the entire collapse of civilization and the collapse of nature. And that's what's so confusing. No, we can't do the mitigation thing, but we can adapt to small-scale crises. Okay, for example, we all in Florida here, when we have hurricanes, we lose electricity for 2 or 3 weeks. We bridge that very easily because we have the generators. Okay, so what we do is we learn to bridge, and it is quite possible that for the rest of the century there will be receiving areas that currently have very little real estate value. If you're into long-term plays, now how do I know this? My wealthy clients, my hyper-wealthy clients, who are very aware, are making these places for themselves. They're very aware because they get the best information. And we're already creating a whole series of towns, not a whole series, basically one very important one that is ready to bridge the troubles. And that's where all the ideas start. They start at the top. I know speakers come from the bottom, but that's all. From the top comes the smarts, the smart people that are getting prepared to survive. And that will slow down. So if you are the kind of real estate, you're in the kind of real estate that's the long-range play. Okay, the long range are disease that will never have any money. You can read about that in Bloomberg today. And also the receiving areas, which you can read about in Bloomberg today, both articles today came in. That's the long range play.
Yes.
And that's what the future is about.
So go, that could change the real estate markets in Wisconsin and Michigan and some of these places today. Beautiful places. I have to say that this is probably, you've gotten the most compressed version of Andreas Duany ever in history. We appreciate your attention, and that wraps it up for today.